Okay, here we are for our final session of the day, our fifth and final session of the day. Last but most definitely not least, you know what's fun? It's for those of you who are here at the beginning of the day, 9:30 a.m. start time. It's interesting to contrast what proportion of the attendees in here are students versus then. So at the beginning of the day, we had, I think, 2 students total, because 9:30 a.m., I know it's really hard for the students to get up so early, but it's so wonderful to see many students here now. So welcome to them. And it is my great pleasure to introduce the moderator for our last session, the Race to Dominate AI, my colleague and here at Stanford and within CEPR, Daniel Ho. Daniel is the William Benjamin Scott and Luna M. Scott Professor of Law, Professor of Political Science, Professor of Computer Science by courtesy, and Senior Fellow at a bunch of places, including here at CEPR and at the Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence. Hi. Dan serves on the National Artificial Intelligence Advisory Commission, advising the White House on AI policy, as a senior advisor on responsible AI at the U.S. Department of Labor, on the Committee on National Statistics of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. I'm just going to keep going on. There's so much here. His scholarship focuses on administrative law, regulatory policy, and anti-discrimination law. With the Reg Lab, his work has developed high-impact demonstration projects of data science and machine learning in public policy through partnerships with a range of government agencies, including the IRS, Treasury Department, EPA, the Department of Labor, Santa Clara County Public Health Department, and Seattle and King County Public Health. The collaboration with Santa Clara County was awarded the Innovative Practice Gold Award for the highest level of program innovation to serve community during the COVID-19 pandemic by the National Association of County and City Health Officials. So as you can tell, and I could probably go on and on and on about his many accomplishments and awards and publications over the years, but let me just conclude by saying he received his JD from Yale Law School and his PhD from Harvard, and clerked for Judge Stephen Williams on the U.S. Court of Appeals, District of Columbia Circuit. So please join me in welcoming our moderator, who will introduce the panelists for our final session, Daniel Ho.
Well, welcome everyone, and thanks, Mark, for that really generous introduction. I apologize that it had to be so long. I am really excited to moderate this panel with just an extraordinary set of participants. The title of the panel is Race to Dominate AI, Implications for Civil Society, National Security, and Regulation. And I'm going to introduce the panelists. Each of the panelists will offer 3 minutes of opening remarks. Then we'll really have a bit of a conversation amongst the panel and then open it up for Q&A. And so I'll start with the introductions. Fei-Fei Li is the Sequoia Capital Professor of Computer Science at Stanford. She's the co-director and founder of the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence, or Stanford High. She's widely known as the creator of ImageNet, an image database organized according to the WordNet hierarchy, which was published in 2009 and really sparked the computer vision revolution, and has been cited no less than 58,000 times to date. She was formerly on the board of what used to be known as Twitter. She co-founded a really innovative organization called AI for All, which promotes diversity and inclusion and education in AI. And she is a member of the National Academy of Engineering, the National Academy of Medicine, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And I'm very happy to note we'll also have a book forthcoming next week called The Worlds I See, Curiosity, Exploration, and Discovery at the Dawn of AI. So make sure to pre-order your copy. It's available on Amazon right now. Next, happy to introduce Eric Brynjolfsson, who is the Jerry Yang and Akiko Yamazaki Professor, Senior Fellow and Director of the Stanford Digital Economy Lab at Stanford High. He's also the Ralph Landau Senior Fellow here at CEPR, Professor by courtesy in the Econ Department at GSB, the Department of Economics and HNS, and Research Associate at NBER. He has authored no less than 6 books, most notably the second machine age, work, progress, and prosperity in a time of brilliant technologies, and some insights from which I think he's likely to share. For instance, he's written most recently about something he calls the Turing trap, really to try to think more rigorously about when automation acts as a substitute or as a complement to the labor force. Last but not least, we have Ili Barakhtari, who is the president and CEO of the Special Competitive Studies Project. SCSP, for those of you who don't know it, is an incredibly important entity that aims to develop recommendations for America's long-term competitiveness for AI and other emerging technologies. Previously, Ili served as the executive director for a very important congressionally created commission called the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, which has had an outsized impact on the way the government has been approaching AI. He also served as chief of staff to the National Security Advisor, McMaster, and has held a wide range of other governmental roles, for which he was awarded the Department of Defense Distinguished Civilian Service Medal, the highest award given to a career DoD civilian employee. So I'm absolutely thrilled to have this panel here, and I will turn it to Feifei to kick us off with some opening remarks.
Well, thank you, and it's quite an honor to be invited by Mark, Dan, and to be here and with all my distinguished colleagues. So I'm given 3 minutes. So look, I've been an AI technologist for all my career. It's been decades of working AI, and for those of us who are technologists, we're always very, very excited about our technology. But this is truly an inflection point, even for someone who should be old and jaded about how much progress there has been. I've never seen an inflection point compared to 2022, the end of 2022, the release of ChatGPT. When I say why it's an inflection point, it really has two aspects. One is the maturation of this very, very powerful horizontal platform level technology. You've all by now experienced what it feels like to engage with a piece of computer software that can have that level of understanding of human language and knowledge. And that from a business point of view is just endless possibilities. I'm sure we'll dive deeper into that. You know, if you look at since the ChatGPT moment, the kind of exponential vertical growth of user engagement, business engagement, the mushrooming of all kinds of applications, use cases, and all this. The other side of this inflection point is also the public awakening. It's not just public in the sense of the whole globe has realized we've hit the beginning or the up ramp of the AI curve, but it's also public policy getting very engaged. You know, a number of us have been working at Stanford High, which is actually a policy institute on this AI technology, and we've been going to DC and Sacramento and state, local governments for years. But this moment, that the level of excitement and willingness to engage from policy world is really truly driven by this public awakening. Oh boy, I only have 30 seconds left. I do want to say...
We'll get more time later.
I do want to say two things. One is, as a technologist, I'm against all irresponsible hype, but it is important to recognize this is the beginning of an explosive growth, and large language model is just the first out of the gate. There will be other technological advances we need to be looking out for, and we need to be preparing for, and we need to think about our competitive leadership as a nation. And the last thing I want to say, which is the most important thing, is I think for a national competitive point of view, as well as truly for the betterment of humanity, we need to invest in public sector. There is a dire urgency that the public sector needs to get the resources we can to do AI. Not a single university in America today can train a ChatGPT model. Think about this. Not a single university. And without public sector, I'll finish in 20 seconds then. Without public sector, we don't have trusted sources to evaluate and assess this technology. We don't have developers and innovators at the steering wheel together with private sector to innovate for the next generation of this technology. And worst, we will be missing all the opportunities with all the possible scientific discoveries and from curing cancers to superpowering teachers to mapping biodiversities to tackling climate changes. All these opportunities will be largely dearly missed. So we can dive deeper, but this is really my message: invest in public sector right now for all the good reasons.
Thank you, Fei-Fei. Eric?
Thanks. And what Fei-Fei said about this being at an inflection point is a big part of the reason that I'm in this chair right here. In fact, specifically, Fei-Fei, about 3 or 4 years ago, invited me to come out from MIT along with Mark, and the two of them didn't take much convincing. I'm so glad I came here because within about a 30-mile radius of, I'd say, this chair right here, there is an amazing amount of innovation going on. Fei-Fei mentioned what's happening in generative AI and all the other revolutions. So I'm really happy to have come out here. And what we're seeing is, as Fei-Fei said, a really fundamentally transformative technology. And this doesn't happen too often in history. I compare it to other general purpose technologies. Economists used to call those GPTs, but I think that acronym has been stolen. General purpose technology, well, the first one really was probably the steam engine, which ignited the Industrial Revolution. For centuries or millennia before that, living standards were pretty much flat. Most humans were living at something close to subsistence level. Now we're 30 or 50 times wealthier than we were back then. There are other general purpose technologies like electricity, and now I think artificial intelligence is perhaps the most general of all general purpose technologies, because what it does is not simply augment our muscles like the steam engine, but augment our minds. And that's a really fundamental thing, because if you can solve intelligence, you can use that to solve so many other problems in the world. Now, the economics of it are really interesting, and I think not as well understood as they should be, and we're trying to work on that as part of the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI. We've got a lab called the Digital Economy Lab, where we're looking at these questions of what's happening to productivity, work, and employment. And just briefly, I'll say that the news is really good on the productivity side. We've done some case studies where we've looked at the introduction of large language models and other tools into companies, and we're seeing eye-popping improvements in productivity. 10, 20, 30, 40% or more. We looked at a call center where there's about a 35% improvement for the least skilled workers. Others have looked at writing applications, coding applications, 40 or more. Just a couple days ago, I had Ethan Mollick come in and give a seminar talking about a registered experiment where they used it for management consultants and had 30 to 40% improvements. So I think that the coming decade is going to be one of significantly higher productivity growth. Those of you who are in the policy world, you may know that the Congressional Budget Office has predicted 1.4% per year productivity growth for the next 10 years. I think that's way lower than what it's going to be. It's actually probably going to be closer to double that, like at least 3%, closer to what it was in the 90s during the internet boom, or maybe even more than that, simply based on the technologies we already have in the pipeline, let alone the ones that are being invented. On work and employment, I'm cautiously optimistic. I am worried there's going to be a lot of disruption, and there'll be changes in demand for different kinds of tasks and skills. I don't foresee any mass unemployment. Jeff Hinton, back in 2016, said we need to stop training radiologists and other types of jobs because machines are so much better. We actually have more radiologists working now, and as you probably know, overall unemployment is close to record lows. Will it continue that way? I guess it depends a lot on the business cycle and other things, but I don't think AI by itself is going to cause any mass unemployment. Instead, there's going to be a lot of rearrangement. There are still so many tasks where humans are significantly better and other tasks where machines are better, and so managers, policymakers are going to have to manage that transition. Probably more disruption than we've seen in any previous decade, and that's going to call for policies in the safety nets and training and other areas. And I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit. So with that, let me just wrap up and say that this is a fundamentally transformative technology that has tremendous economic implications.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for inviting me, and it's really an honor to be on the panel with Feifei and Eric. I've known them for many years now, and tremendous work by both of them in this space. So as Dan mentioned, I've spent about 12 years working in the Pentagon, and my last job in the Pentagon was really when I got their call to serve on the AI commission that Congress created. Now, for most of you that don't understand why Congress creates this commission is, in 2018, I think, Congress saw really two trends coming our way, especially in Washington. Number one was there was a huge, I think, progress in terms of models that are being developed here in Silicon Valley primarily, but also around the world. And I think everything they were hearing from their constituencies is that there's a powerful technology that Eric mentioned is going to be so transformative that Congress should pay attention. And so that was, I think, on one side why Congress was really perplexed by AI. And the second thing, I think, in 2018, every signal coming out of China was that China really understood the importance of this technology, and they were doubling down in terms of the strategy, investments, and the path that they wanted to see China go in the future. So with those two factors in mind, I think Congress creates a commission, and they pick individuals from private sector, academia, and former government officials to serve with the clear objective of looking at what our federal government agencies need to really adopt faster artificial intelligence. And so after two years of work, we submitted a really thorough report to Congress. And I think out of that report so far, we have had about 55 pieces of legislation that have been passed. But a lot of them have not been passed. And I think this goes back to Feifei's point of like, how can we really bring the public sector and the government really at the same level with the private sector. And I think this is a unique opportunity we have as a country, probably because generally during the Cold War, the government was in charge of innovation. Most of the labs, the invention came from government labs. But I think now we're dealing with a technology that is so powerful, so transformative, and that private sector leads. But on the other hand, we are not at the level where public sector can pick up. So I'll just focus on a couple of things that I think are left still to be done by the work of the commission that I still pursue. And 2 days ago, I also delivered the same message inside forum that Senator Schumer is organizing. Number one is we need to invest more in basic R&D and applied research. If you look at the amount of money that America has invested during the Cold War, it amounted to almost 2% of our GDP. Now it's less than 1%. I think last year we invested $1.7 billion towards the non-defense basic R&D and applied research. And so I think we can do better. As part of the AI Commission, we recommended we should double that amount every year. And in 2026, we should get to $32 billion. I think there was a general sense 2 days ago in the Senate that we need to invest $8 billion in the upcoming bill, which I fully support, and all of the members supported that idea, because this is one area that Feifei was mentioning. We need universities to have resources, both in terms of money, but also in terms of tools, to really advance, the research and all these applications. So that is the one piece. And I think the National Resource Cloud that Stanford and HAI has advocated and we have advocated is one of those areas. For those of you that don't know, what we have recommended together collectively here is that we need to provide with small and medium-sized companies academic research access to the cloud. So they have tools, they have the capability and the compute power to do research the same way that people in private sector do. And I think that recommendation is also gaining momentum. So I'm hopeful, I'm always optimistic that these things will get done. And then the last piece really that is the people issue. And there are several layers on the people issue. Number one is how do you educate young Americans that this is an attractive field to stay? If you'd asked me 3 years ago, what would I push my kids to study? Coding was the word of the that I would push them. But coding is no longer the most important thing because now with all these models, things are going to change, as Eric mentioned, productivity, labor, all these things are changing as we speak. So I think we need to make sure that the young people have access to personalized education. And I think these models will offer that. The second piece is immigration. I'm an immigrant, and this country should remain the world magnet for talented immigrants. When I think H-1B visa is one of the clear examples of how we have to fix it. I think right now the cap is 65,000. We have to increase it to probably 3 times as more because otherwise, you saw the case of Canada in July when 10,000 people that have expired H-1B visas in the United States apply to work in Canada. So I think that's an easy lift. I think that we're getting to a consensus maybe on the Hill that there's a need to fix the H-1B issue. And then the third piece is government need access to the talented people. And it's really difficult right now. If I have to bring Eric to help any government agencies, he probably has to wait 12 months for any paperwork to be finished before you can ask him any questions that is relevant today. So we have to remove these barriers because we have to relook probably the public-private concept completely. Because I think for this kind of a technology where knowledge and innovation resides outside of government, you need to break the barriers so people can access the knowledge and the expertise and everything else. But I'll stop there.
Thank you, Illy. Eric Schmidt, who was who co-chaired the National Security Commission on AI, was asked during a recent House Oversight hearing how Congress was doing in terms of implementing. And actually, his answer was it was actually getting a pretty passing grade in terms of implementing such a wide range of the recommendations. But the one that Eric singled out during his testimony as really lacking was actually the public sector workforce component. There are simply not enough technologists within government to actually be able to responsibly figure out how to govern this technology. Both Feifei and Eric, you had mentioned the notion that this is really an inflection point. And so I guess I think Illy got to this kind of most directly, but I'd love to hear from each of you maybe about what you feel like the most urgent social issues are that we're facing with this particular race to dominate AI, as per the title of the panel. So I don't know which one of you wants to take a crack at that first.
So I'm debating which one I should say. I can double click on the public sector. I do think that is a extremely urgent, and I worry every day that we were not doing this yesterday. So, but having said that, let me just raise one issue. I think actually socially, education is so important. When I say education, I don't mean classroom per se. I don't mean K-12 higher education. I mean public education, because right now what I'm seeing is that the rhetoric of AI, the clickbait of AI is largely unhealthy. You know, there's like so many people now focusing on this whole sentientness of, is the machine overlord coming, Terminators coming, when we actually have real issues like jobs and you know, bias, disinformation. Oh my God, 2024, right? These are much more urgent issues, yet the public is not well educated, and business is not very well educated. I mean, we live in Silicon Valley and this truly is a bubble, but nationwide, we either have so many American business that's not even aware what is coming, or you know, there is not enough good understanding of what this technology is, and our business leaders are not making the best decisions. And last but not the least at all is the policy world is not well educated. I'm actually impressed Eric Schmidt gave it a passing grade. That's very, very generous of him.
You have a harsher grader?
Well, I resist the grade inflation for sure. But I do think the policy world needs to be much better. I mean, Illy, you're just like such an outlier, shining example. But from regulatory to you know, other sides, I think that's a social issue, like education in general and awareness. And one more time, I just want to say, we need to do this fast because disinformation is a huge thing that's coming. We're seeing this from Ukrainian-Russian conflict. We're seeing this from Israeli-Gaza conflict. We're going to see this as ongoing leading up to 2024. We urgently need better public education.
Thank you, Feifei.
So yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question, because this is really where I see the urgent problem is that the technology is improving exponentially fast, faster than even the technologists expected. I talked to many of them, Feifei and others, and they've been surprised at some of the breakthroughs that have happened, and there's no end in sight. It seems to be almost accelerating. But at the same time, our social institutions, our skills, our organizations, they are not moving at exponential. In fact, I'm not sure they're moving at all, maybe sometimes in the wrong direction. So that growing gap is where most of our challenges and most of our opportunities lie. And we need to address that gap, not by slowing the technology, not by stopping the advance of that, but by speeding up our understanding of these social and organizational issues. And so there's a real need for people in this room to devote more attention to it. I'm so glad Ely and others and Feifei has been supporting a lot of work in this area. To get to the specific areas that I'm most concerned about, I've put into 3 buckets. The first one is around the ability of these models to create content that may or may not be true. They can be hyper-persuasive, superhuman persuasive capabilities that can learn very quickly how to personalize what they're targeting, and that could be misinformation, disinformation, getting polarization. And you mentioned the 2024 election. I mean, there's going to be some interesting things, I guess I should say, coming up, both with text but also audio. I'm getting phone calls now from bots, images, of course, deep fakes of all sorts of types. So there's a whole set of cyber issues as well in that category. The second one is around work and employment, as Feifei mentioned, that we're seeing faster changes in the underlying technology, and these general purpose tech, or I should say the generative pre-trained transformers, the GPTs that OpenAI and large language models that other people are coming out with, are able to do a large percentage of the tasks, or at least help with them, that human knowledge workers can do. One study said that about 80% of workers will have at least 10% of their tasks affected. That's a level of disruption in a short period of time. We've never seen anything quite like that before. And people, it's rolling out much more quickly. ChatGPT went from 0 to 100 million users in like 2 months. So it's very rapidly being adopted. It's not one of these things that we see hypothetically in the future. And we're going to need retraining, reorganization. And the answer is not to try to freeze in place any of the existing jobs, but rather have some dynamism to be able to adapt to the new tasks and jobs. And then the third one, which I'm going to set up Ely for, is just around national security and the risks. There are things happening in other countries, China and elsewhere, the Middle East now. And these technologies can amplify, create a whole different way of doing warfare, as well as smaller entities. And there are, I think, genuine risks of catastrophe that we need to pay attention to with viruses and others. And so we need to pay attention to that set of risks as well. So at least in those 3 buckets, we need to be concerned.
I think you guys said almost everything.
Like I said, I left
I know you did.
About the last one.
I mean, look, on one end, when we talk about technology, and I think Feifei and Eric know much more than I do, if we all agree that this is that moment in history that you compare to steam engine or electricity, are we acting the same way, our society acted 100 years ago? I would argue probably not. I mean, there's a lot of conversation happening about this. But if this technology is going to transform our society and our education and our healthcare and ultimately, impact our national security, then I don't think the actions are where our rhetoric is right now in terms of how powerful this technology is. So I think that's on one end. On the second hand is, just the last events that have happened in the Middle East just underscore how volatile the security environment is globally. And I think the previous panels really talked about this. Whether or not this reminds us of, before World War I or before World War II or 1950s, either of those or any one of them is not a good outcome. And so if you look at the volatile security environment, if you look at the pace of the technology, state and non-state actors getting hold of these capabilities, I think this is really a decisive decade, as the president has said in his national security strategy. Mm-hmm. And so, and if you look at the rest of this decade, I don't think things will get even easier, because if you look at the China publicly stating their goals for the rest of this decade, if you look at what Russia is doing, you see now events around Iran and their malign activities. I think that things are just getting more and more complicated, and you add on top of that AI. I think we enter really an unpredictable security environment. Henry Kissinger likes to quote this, in which he said, a small incident in the Balkan region in 1914 nobody ever predicted that small incident could lead to world war, but it did. Can we have a small incident in 2024 that it's an unexplained AI model that messes up, probably our systems or any other democratic systems, and that unexplained system leads to a massive misunderstanding between global powers, 100%. So I think this is one of those times in history in which we need government to step in, I think. We need the necessary investments. We need to be organized differently for this, because the argument we make is after World War II, we created different set of institutions because we were in different security environments, so we were organized differently. Today, we're slow rolling all these things. It took us 3 years to pass the CHIPS Act, for example. And nobody was opposed to the CHIPS Act. It was the most bipartisan bill probably we have ever seen in our recent history, and it took us just 3 years to pass it. And so I think there are certain things in which we have to accelerate. I think I agree with you, Feifei, that we are in that moment now. We just have to do it. We were supposed to do it yesterday, but we got to do it. Because I think as we enter 2025, 2030, this is going to be a really unpredictable and uncertain decade. And I think we need to be able to manage both the impact of this technology and also the security environment that is evolving globally.
So each of you has provided a pretty vivid description of some urgent challenges. And I guess let me then naturally segue into the question of what should actually be done, particularly on the regulation side. Sam Altman famously went to the Senate and suggested licensing as a way to constrain some of the uses of large language models or foundation models. We have a widely anticipated executive order that will be forthcoming likely on Monday by the White House. Illy had mentioned how Senator Schumer is hosting a series of AI Insight forums, really agitating for legislative intervention. We're less than a week away from the UK summit. That's largely focused on AI safety issues. And the EU is in the phase of negotiating through these trilogues, the EU AI Act. And so I guess that raises the question, you've provided these really vivid descriptions of what you think the most urgent social issues are. What role do you see for regulation to address some of these challenges?
I guess I can start. We do talk a lot about this. First, I want to just say that regulation is, I still believe, is one part of the policy effort. We tend to, at least sometimes when we talk about AI policy, we just only look at it from a regulatory angle, and I don't think that's enough. We did say a lot about incentivization, so I'll park that, even though I believe strongly policy work there's a big part that needs to be incentivizing and rejuvenation and all that. But coming to regulatory side, it's true AI is a very powerful technology which is always going to be a double-edged sword. I personally actually believe, I guess I believe two things. One is that AI is such a horizontal technology that I do not personally think it makes sense to create an overarching, some kind of regulatory body that look at the entirety of AI. It's just not possible because, you can, it's impractical. But because it's so horizontal, the rubber does meet the road. It meets the road when it's in medical devices, or it meets the road when it's trying to assess your physical rehabilitation ability. It meets the road if you send a self-driving car on the road, literally. It meets the road if you use that to hire people in companies. So we should look at these existing vertical regulatory frameworks where we have already ways, I mean, I'm not saying they're perfect. We know they're far from perfect, but there are ways where we are putting guardrails around these different vertical use cases, but we urgently update them, knowing what AI can do, knowing what AI can superpower, knowing what AI can bring as new possibilities. So I guess my point is that I care a lot about urgent update of existing regulatory framework. I do want to say there is one area that I think we're inheriting an issue that as a society we never really solved, and AI is going to make it way worse. And that's just social media, internet. Because as a country, as a society, we haven't had good regulatory framework. And of course, Section 230 and all that. And now we're going to have AI to superpower all the good, bad, and the ugly. And there, I'm not an expert. I actually am curious what Erica Ely would say. Maybe there needs to be a different agency or something. That's one area I would like to see newer innovation and changes.
Thanks, Feifei.
Well, I just want to say +1 to what everything that Feifei said, and let me just say a little bit about Signs for Hope. I mean, I've been visiting Washington, not as much as Ely or Feifei, I think, but a number of times. And over the years, to be honest, most of the people in Congress and administrations were not that interested in AI. I went to some AI summits, et cetera, but it wasn't a big focus of attention. That's completely changed this year. Now, I go there and everyone's read the papers in advance. They're prepared with questions, whether it's on the Senate, the House, the White House, the departments. It's a complete sea change of attention. It's also in industry. I mean, I think it's fairly unusual that you have the tech players asking to be regulated and saying, yes, here's a proposal for how you can regulate us. And so there's an interest in that. I think what's missing is, and Feifei mentioned this in her opening remarks, is I have to say, I don't think academia is enough a part of that conversation yet, that industry has stepped up in a big way and Congress needs it. But, and there's a lot of well-meaning, smart, good people in industry, but ultimately, as economists, they have a different set of incentives. I mean, however well-meaning they are, they have to respond to stockholders. They have a profit motive, and when they're looking at what kinds of regulations to put in place, inevitably they're going to put their thumb on the scale, or there's going to be at least the perception that they're putting the thumb on the scale for ones that favor their businesses and hurt their competitors and entrants. And we see that right now, for instance, with some of the proposals of licensing and large language models, preventing open source, et cetera. And it may be a good idea, but it's hard to trust their good intentions alone, given the known, billion-dollar incentives they have to have it go a certain way. So the thing I would like to see more of is people like you and all the people in this room have a bigger voice in those conversations. Not that we are perfect or disinterested in all the decisions, but at least it would be a different perspective that could benefit these choices.
Can I just add something though? Sorry. I do want to call out, Eric, that the lack of public sector and academic voice right now in Washington, D.C. is not for the lack of trying. The public sector and academia have been trying, but right now there is an outsized obsession with private sector enamorment with those products that the voice, some of the long-term voices of academia and public sector are being drowned. I mean, I do want to call out that we applaud, all these senators and Congress to invite technology world to have a conversation, but we want to call out that they are missing important voices. These voices are in their ecosystem, but they are just putting too much unbalanced attention to the private sector.
Okay, so you asked about regulation, and I am where Feifei is in this space. I think a lot of emphasis has been put on regulation because I think part of this is sort of like a legacy of how we grew up, the movies we watched, and how we will came to believe that this technology is going to lead us to some kind of a Skynet scenarios. And so I think a lot of people are obsessed with how can we put a plug on that right now. And I think that's why there's a lot of emphasis on regulation. But I think we have to find a balance there. We have to find a balance of how do we stay, the most innovative country in the world while regulating or putting some kind of guardrails around this technology. I think this is not nothing new. I think this is a role that Congress and the White House have to play in terms of putting some guardrails. But I think I'm with Feifei. I think the way I would approach this is, number one is this has to be a sector specific, because you cannot do a wholesale of regulating AI. So that's the first approach. The second approach is, what are these government and agencies missing in terms of authorities and resources? Not many people know, but there's an agency called NIST that is in charge of actually testing and deploying these kind of technologies. They're just not well funded, well known, and well resourced. And Dan and I served on one of their committees. But instead of creating whole new agencies, why not just improve the existing ones and give them more authorities and more resources to address the challenges of today's technology? So I think that would be my second recommendation. The first one, really specific to sectors. Second one is beef up existing authorities. All the departments and agencies have some kind of AI programs. Generative AI is just so mainstream popular, but I think all of them have moved in AI for a couple of years now. Maybe they have small projects, and I used to call them the islands of hope, because they were just these small offices that were doing something with AI in terms of labeling data, building the infrastructure, but they couldn't scale. I think generative AI just put a lot of emphasis on the importance and why this is so transformative. Then the leadership started paying attention. Oh, where's that AI office that I had it for 5 years now that I wasn't paying attention? And so I think the second thing is really how to enable the department agencies to scale existing programs, to understand that this is not just AI that you flip the switch, but you have to build for years the necessary infrastructure to have this technology really function. And then the last point I would say is focus on high consequence cases. If you cannot do a specific and wholesale, then what are the most high consequence cases that this AI will hurt or harm? And I cannot agree more with Eric here. I think 2024 is going to be really difficult for us. I think more than 2 billion people around the world are going we're going to hit the elections, and most of them are democratic countries. So it's us, EU, India, Taiwan, among others. And so if social media then hits the AI enabled disinfo and misinfo, I think that is probably a cause for concern. So my closest alligator to the shore would be how to address that space right now. Whether or not we need a standalone agency, I think, as I said, it took us 3 years to pass the CHIPS Act. We can all sound good if we say we need an AI agency, but by the time we can create and stand up an independent agency, I think more work needs to be done to improve really the work of the existing agencies.
It's a really interesting point, both by Feifei and Illy. FDA has already approved 500 AI medical devices. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau already has guidance for AI in certain financial services products. The Department of Justice and EOC have issued guidance when it comes to disability discrimination in labor and employment AI products. And I think James Q. Wilson, who wrote one of the most famous books on the bureaucracy, said, presidents have taken to bureaucratic reorganizations the way that people take to fad diets, and about to the same effect. And so that's the concern. If you try to reorganize vast parts of government, where does that really lead you? I want to return a little bit to some of the early discussion here on public investment and this balance of where innovation is happening. One of the things that's particularly striking, I think, Feifei, you noted this in your opening remarks, is how much of the locus of where frontier AI research is happening has migrated out of sort of the university system. And I'd just love for each of you maybe to opine a little bit on why has that been the case, and what promise do you see about the various R&D proposals that exist out there to address this particular shifting balance of where AI innovation is happening?
Well, I can start with especially the cost, right? Why has AI innovation and these really most cutting edge technology shifted to a very small number of technology companies? There are 4 ingredients to make AI happen today. 3 of them are technical and 1 of them is not. So the chips, the GPUs basically, and the data, big data drives AI. That's what this technology is. And the algorithm. The algorithm is what, the transformers or whatever. But the 4th ingredient actually tend to be overlooked, and it's actually critical, is the people. The people who are these talents. America has predominantly trained the most number of AI talents. Some of are in schools like Stanford, and right now these talents are extremely expensive. They actually like to hang out with their friends, so they cluster in these really rich big tech companies or very, very well-resourced startups. And then all these three, the data and the chips and all that are also there. So what we get is it's very, very hard to compete with them. Now, I don't think universities should ever hope to compete with, let's say, create GPT-5, and race to GPT-6. But there's so much the university should do and can do. For example, we do have very special talent. If we solve the visa issue, it would be even better. But we have talent not only on the computer science side, but we have, I love working with Eric's postdocs and students in social science. We've got medical students. We've got just talents of all disciplines, and that kind of innovation is incredible. We also have special data, right? Like the kind of data you guys work with, the kind of data our medical school is generating, the kind of data, our School of Sustainability is generating, and we should take advantage of that. But we need to take care of talent, we need to take care of the lack of chips, the compute resource with this Create AI Act. And I think with that, there is possibility to rebalance this. And last but not the least, it's a call to universities to innovate its own model. So what did E.O. Wilson say? The problem of humanity is that we have Paleolithic emotion, medieval institution, and godlike technology. And I think we do need to innovate our institutions. We're seeing that some universities are starting to experiment with deeper industry partnership or more flexible industry partnership. We're seeing actually privately funded nonprofit organization. I mean, OpenAI started as a nonprofit, right? Are actually becoming the leaders in innovation, and I think we need to be open-minded to that. So that's how I see that. There is imbalance now, but there is hope if we do things on the public side.
Let me build on what Fei said about the different components that are driving this. And from an economist's perspective, a lot of it has to do with economies of scale and scope. In computer science, there are scaling laws that build on the things that Fei mentioned, compute power, data, number of parameters, size of the models. And it turns out that for these large language models, as you increase each of those proportionately, you get a predictable improvement, at least so far, in performance. And this has happened very consistently over 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 or 9, 10 orders of magnitude of increases on each of those dimensions. And because this has become increasingly believed to be the way to get better performance on GPT-2 to 3 to GPT-4 and now GPT-5, one of the things that the companies are doing is just building massively bigger and bigger models to the point where the cost is so much that universities can't come close to competing with those kinds of numbers. There are only a few companies on the planet that can do it, and it's continued to go. We don't know for sure for these scaling laws they're going to continue just by making everything bigger, but that's the way a lot of them are betting right now. Now, what can you do about that? Fei also pointed a way around that is like, we need to come up with new algorithms, other ways of doing it. I once had a conversation with Jeff Hinton. Some people call Fei the godmother of artificial intelligence, and they called Jeff Hinton the godfather. I asked him, what kind of like massive machine are you using to do your analyses? Like what kind of compute power do you work with? And you know what he said? He said, an Apple MacBook. And I was like, that's interesting, because he's working at a level of, a conceptual level of abstraction that's, very different than just cranking the, putting more and more GPUs into it. He's trying to come up with entirely new approaches to solving it. And that's where I think academia may have a significant advantage, is coming up with the next transformer, the next deep learning, the next ImageNet, and the other kinds of things that are just a whole different way of thinking about things. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to contribute in those ways. That said, it wouldn't hurt if academia had some more money and was able to do a little bit more on the compute side as well.
I mean, I don't have much to add, Dan, except I think they covered a lot, and I never worked in academia, so. But I think, look, what makes United States really unique is that after World War II, Vannevar Bush created the triangle of innovation. And that triangle of innovation that really led for most of the inventions during Cold War and post-Cold War was the balance of innovation between government, private sector, and academia. And I think over time, that triangle got skewed a little bit because I think a lot of innovation moved to private sector, especially post-Cold War, because the money went there. And I think there was a lot of excitement. And I think government really decreased the level of spending that they were interested in putting through National Science Foundation, through universities, all these things. So I think there's a wide recognition that has to be rebalanced. Now it's difficult because the private sector has moved so fast, and these platforms are so fast in speed and scale, as you mentioned, Eric. But I think the Chips and Science Act was the first step. Now the problem we have is that the science portion of the Chips Act was not funded. Right, so how do we really fund the science piece? And I think there are a lot of elements there that would go towards, enabling universities to step up the innovation piece. The one conversation I had with one of the professors from MIT last week, she was complaining about the access to compute power, to the latest and greatest models of these chips. And one idea we were having is, we're placing a lot of export controls on some of our major chips companies to not sell to China anymore. Mm-hmm. And so why not buy those chips then and offer it to universities? Because if that's where the lack is right now, and the companies are complaining about the export control rules, then there's a market to redirect those chips towards academia, where people can use them for research. But I think the first step here is really doubling down and increasing the money when it comes to basic R&D. As I said, we as an AI Commission recommended we need to double the amount of money that goes towards this effort. So when we started was $1.5 billion we were investing in basic non-defense R&D. The goal was to get to $32 billion by 2026. As I said 2 days ago in the Senate, there was a sentiment the next billing cycle we can have maybe $8 billion towards this greater goal. And I think the moment really is right now, because I think what you hear from the academic circles is that exact complaint. We don't have any more access. Innovation is moved out of our labs, so we have to bring it back. And I think that's where the secret ingredient of our society is, where the innovation will happen there. And then scaling will happen in private sector, because neither government nor academia will be able to scale it to the point that we will all use it.
Yeah, I had the experience of one machine learning PhD student who was really excited about devoting his career to working for government and deploying machine learning within government, since we had a major collaboration with an agency. And he was so dispirited by the year that it took to procure a single GPU node that he shifted his career back and is not thinking about the public sector at all. And I think that's one of those things that you lose is the talent, right? The high AI index estimates that less than 2% of AI PhDs consider a career in the public sector. I think we have maybe time for one other question before we turn it to general audience Q&A. And maybe let me return to, I think, Eric, what you had started us off with, which is some of these questions around the future of labor. Mm-hmm. We're here at CEPR, and I think you, in addition to folks like Doron Asamogu, who've written really lucidly about some of these real choices we have to make as a society about the impact of automation on the labor force. You give a pretty optimistic growth estimate when you started us off. There's a tremendous amount of anxiety around how AI may displace labor. I'll invite Feifei and Illy to chime in as well, but just wanted to give you the chance to say a little bit about your views on this and what choices we can make as a society to ensure that anxiety doesn't bear out in reality of major labor displacement.
Well, I am optimistic about the technology. I'm optimistic about productivity, but I'm very concerned concerned about distribution and what's going to happen. There'll be winners and losers, and we haven't done a great job, actually, historically. The past decade, we've seen growing income inequality. We've got skill bias, technical change. Technologies have often been used to concentrate wealth and power. And looking forward, I'm worried that's going to happen or may even get worse. And one of the reasons for that is often the technologies are used to automate. And there's a mindset often of looking at what a human is doing and thinking, how can we make a machine do the same thing? And I think it's a kind of an inspirational goal, but it also, from an economist's perspective, what you're doing then is you're creating a substitute for the human. Another approach is looking at humans and thinking, how can we augment them? We're at the Institute for Human-Centered AI, and the idea is, what can we do to keep humans involved and make humans' capabilities greater, maybe new kinds of creativity, do new things that couldn't be done before. That second approach is more likely to lead not to substitutes, but to complements. And that means that they make the human labor more valuable rather than less valuable. These two choices, either one of them, to be clear, could be productive, it could be very profitable to do either one, but the first choice will tend to have less compensation going to workers and labor and more concentration in capital. The second choice is more likely to lead to widely distributed wealth and prosperity. I suspect most of you in the room right now would rather have a world not just has prosperity, but shared prosperity. And that means we need to think about how we can steer the technology. And I believe, like Daron Acemoglu does as well, that we do have some choices to help steer the technology. It can be done through choices of technologists in terms of the projects that they work on. It can be done through policymakers. Right now, our tax system heavily has a thumb on the scale towards automation, and capital has much lower taxes than labor does. And I'm not sure what the policy logic is of that, but that's the reality. There was a time, 1986, when the tax rates were even. Now they're very uneven. And you look at a whole other set of choices in policy, I won't go through them now, that are all skewed towards disempowering work and labor. And it doesn't have to be that. And finally, managers, entrepreneurs also have choices in how they implement these technologies. In my paper, The Turing Trap, I fleshed this out in a little bit more detail, but I do think that ultimately we have a lot of choices, and either of these paths in front of us are possible, but if we're not careful, we're going to inadvertently, or maybe some people intentionally, push us down that path of greater concentration of wealth and power rather than one of shared prosperity.
I agree 500% with Eric, if that's possible. Just give an example to what Eric says about augmenting humans instead of replacing them. As of year 2023, which is this year, America is short of 1 million nurses. Mm-hmm. In healthcare sector, we have a huge labor shortage problem, and also nurse attrition rate in America is extremely high. It's extremely demanding job and frankly demoralizing sometimes. So at Stanford Medical School and AI Lab, my colleagues and I have been looking at how do we actually augment healthcare workers. For example, our patients need to stay safe and needs to be monitored. And even ICUs, you don't have enough pairs of eyes and hands to help the patients, let alone step-down units, let alone senior homes, and all that, or chronic disease management. So we created this technology called ambient intelligence to use smart sensors to act as extra pairs of eyes for our doctors and nurses to alert clinically relevant events, whether it's a potential fall or it's an exacerbated situation. And of course, as a technology, you have to worry about privacy, you have to worry about bias and all that. Actually, Dan is one of our faculty advisors, making sure we're serving our patients and nurses and doctors well. But I just want to use that as an example to show what Eric is really advocating is we, as technologists, can choose to work on this kind of technology and products eventually that augments and empowers humans and help them rather than taking their agency and their job away.
I don't have much to add, Dan, because Eric is really a leading expert on this issue, but I would argue 2 days ago in front of Senator Schumer, the argument I made is that, while in the near term, we will not have a huge impact on the labor and employment, probably in the midterm and over the long term. This technology is going to fundamentally shift, all of it. And so I think we have about maybe 3 to 4 years of a window to really sketch out how the distribution will affect everybody. And I think this is where government has to step in. And so what we recommended is that we need to create a commission that is focused on the automation and future of work, because employment is ultimately also a political issue. And I think that's when Washington gets really interested, when it impacts, all aspects of our country, and we avoid the issue of concentration that Eric was mentioning. But I think we have maybe 3 to 4 years to really get the seeds of the future right, to avoid the traps that could potentially arise.
You should put Eric on the commission.
100%. Yeah. He's already on another one, I think so.
Well, thanks so much, Elise. So I think we're going to open it up to audience Q&A. So I think there are some folks circulating with microphones, so you should feel free to. Yeah, go ahead.
Since many of you work with government, so you're probably in a good position to speak about this, but can we move some money from the CHIPS Act to an AI, and then AI policy? I guess it's more that you would have to do it. You would have to actually speak to them about it, because otherwise, I find with government, we have to really take the reins. Otherwise, government on its own cannot be left to its own devices.
I'll take this guy. So I think the CHIPS and Science Act it's a really, essentially, really good piece of legislation, but because I think what it recognizes is that there are certain capabilities like advanced chips that we need to, we need to bring the manufacturing of these chips back to the United States. So I think most of the money really is going to go towards building those fabs. But I think what I've said earlier too is that the portion that was missing in that legislation is financing the science portion of the CHIPS and Science Act, which was authorized but not appropriated. And I think portion of that money really is dedicated towards research, towards NAIR, I think it was the National AI Research Cloud. So that's the effort right now that I think some of us are working really to make sure that that piece is appropriated in the next cycle.
Great. We have a fair number of hands up. Why don't we take one up here?
Mark.
Oh, Mark.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
So I've been wanting to ask this. So I just want to get to the title a little bit, and this might be a question most for Ely. So we've talked a lot about how the government in the U.S. is not realizing its potential, which is kind of a common theme here at CPR. So it fits right in. And I'm just wondering, how are we doing relative to other countries? And is there likely, 66 years ago we had Sputnik, is there likely to be a Sputnik moment? Because we in the U.S. we like to compete with other countries that have been mentioned a lot here on things like Olympic medals, Olympic gold medals at the Summer or Winter Olympics or that kind of thing. But I'm just it's hard to get a sense right now of how we're doing, because nobody, and this is an issue always, like how do you assess how is the U.S. doing versus, let's say Russia, China, and other places, or the EU, and so forth?
So Mark, that's a really good question. So I'll tell you, when I was with the AI Commission, the first question the commissioner asked our intelligence community was, hey, can you tell us where are we versus the rest of the world, or China in particular, when it comes to emerging tech? And the first answer is, no, you can't do this, because our intelligence community cannot spy on Americans or cannot do anything that inadvertently touches the data from this side. And so we couldn't do that analysis when we were at the AI Commission, when we left the government, and now. So in terms of AI, there are several aspects. You can take a look at the competition piece. Are you looking at the people aspect? Are you looking at the algorithm? Are you looking at the data? And I think when you start breaking it down, in some areas, China is ahead, in terms of data because of the sheer volume of data that they have vis-a-vis us. But I think what has happened with generative AI models is that I think clearly, the frontier models coming out of the United States are much, much better. And I think there's one model coming out of the Middle East, UAE, that has really sparked a lot of interest and a lot of attention. But I think when it comes to generative AI, I think the Chinese model have not been very, very good because they have several challenges. Number one is the language. as Fei mentioned, AI models rely on a large data set of language models. And I think because Mandarin is only like 2% of the internet, I think their models have not been proven to be really, really good so far. I think the other issue is just the whole concept of how these models are constrained in China because of the political system they live in and they exist. So I think when it comes to AI or generative AI, I think the argument is that we are maybe 2 years ahead of their models at best. But that, needless to say, are they going to go all in really trying to speed ahead their models? Of course they are. You're dealing with a competitor that's a high-tech or a tech-savvy competitor. And when you look at what the huge progress they've done on hypersonic, fintech, drones, I mean, this is a country that has huge pool of talents. They have enormous resources, and they can dedicate state. It's a top-down system in which they can generate that momentum towards like getting ahead and staying ahead.
Can I add something here? So I agree with you. The Gen AI technology from our private sector is doing very well. But Mark, I do want to give you a number to compare, and this is with a friend, is UK. So UK government just gave 900 million pounds, so it's like $1 billion+ to invest in the their national cloud for AI, right? As of today, the US government has not given any money for that. The bill that Illy is working so hard for, and we are working so hard for, is Create AI Act. We're asking for $2.6 billion for creating this.
Over 6 years.
Over 6 years.
So it's 400 million a year.
To create this national cloud. So if you compare the population size, we are definitely behind. I just want to call that out. And one last shameless plug. Every year, HAI publishes an AI index, which Eric sits on the board. And we do have data comparing, in the different aspect, academia, industry, startup, and all that. So I'll send one to you.
I'll give you a fun fact. That $2.6 billion is less than the U.S. spends on interest on the debt in 1 day.
That's not fun. Yeah. Yep.
Thank you for handing Illy a very nice talking point.
That's great.
All right, here.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Closely related question to Mark's is about differences in AI regulation across countries. As we know, there's been an agreement at the White House of a voluntary set of guidelines in the US. The EU is arguably furthest along. Whether you view that as good or bad, I'd be curious to hear with their trilogue conversations around the EU AI Act. And other countries less clear about where things stand. So I've got 2 questions. Number one, is it really important, or how important is it that AI regulations across countries line up? And closely related to that, if they do not, what are the consequences of getting AI regulation wrong for the country who maybe makes a mistake? Thanks.
I think you should answer this.
I know. This is a tough question. We give it to you.
So basically, there's a question that our esteemed panelists can't answer, and they punted over,
the hard one.
to me. Well, Illy, I think you've actually done a lot on the kind of international collaboration side.
So no, thank you for your question. I mean, look, the one thing is, I think we started slow, but I think things are picking up. Like, on Monday, White House is going to release the executive order. I think the Schumer and 3 other senators' effort on the Senate side is really picking up steam. So I think, EU was in the lead, I think, in terms of like rushing to regulate. Now, I disagree fundamentally with how they approached it. But also, EU has become just like Brussels has become like the capital of regulation, and so the challenge to your second point, I think, is most of the time we try to harmonize our policies with our allies and partners, and if our policies are so different on this piece, then I think it's going to present a challenge going forward on anything, whether it's data flow, people flow, innovation, anything that happens in this space. I hope. My biggest issue until 12 months ago is that as much as we pushed back on the EU AI Act, we had nothing. And so I think at least now, hopefully with the White House EO, we have the Bill of Rights that OSTP did. We have the NIST, RMF framework. But hopefully we will have either a piece of policy that is, in terms of the White House EO, but also the legislation that you fundamentally have the American way of how you regulate this. Hopefully it's a good way, because we still haven't seen it. But I think that's sort of like China on paper has the best laws. I mean, if you look at the China AI laws, they're the best on paper. But my point is, I think the rest of the world, especially the democratic world, should have some kind of alignment when it comes to these policies.
I mean, I guess I will chime in with just 2 quick points. One is that the technology is moving so fast that one of the real challenges is how to actually create more adaptable forms of regulatory systems. You see this in the EU AI Act itself, which started off with the proposal for risk-based regulations. Then foundation models hit and ChatGPT is. And it turns out, gosh, it's really hard to shoehorn that into the kind of use case specific risk classification that the EU AI was trying to do. So they come up with a proposal to have specific registration requirements for foundation models. And then the most recent negotiation, well, oh gosh, I don't think we did quite enough for foundation models. So they now have a new definition that was just recently unveiled for, quote, very capable foundation models, right? Where people can then opt out of like, no, we're not really that capable. So that's one of the challenges, I think, of the regulatory space. And I guess in terms of the value of kind of harmonization across regulatory jurisdictions, I would say probably really depends on what the substantive requirement is. It's one thing when you're talking about a kind of export restriction of A100 chips to certain kinds of countries. It's another thing when you're talking about red teaming requirements prior to the release of a model. And I think you'd have to really think about the substantive requirements before you think about how much effort do you want to put in. There's some folks who think, gosh, the only way to regulate this is at the UN level, and that would be a very, very slow process. If you really put the thumb on the scale of like, you have to have complete international harmonization across all of this. All right, I think we may have time for one more question. Whoever's closest to the mic, maybe.
Hi, great panel. I'm a big fan. I think in my next life, what I want to do is come back as a technologist. But I'm mired in the more practical world. Eric, you said earlier, social institutions are moving too slowly. We need to speed them up, not slow down the technology. So my question is, how? Aren't we realistically, given that this morning we talked about our view as economists about globalization and free trade and how that ended up leaving a bunch of people behind, aren't we looking at another moment here where realistically we're going to leave some people behind?
That's my big fear. And I think reprising what happened with globalization was worthwhile because economists had a very simple model there that like globalization, free trade makes the economic pie bigger. Well, there's going to be winners and losers. Well, that's very easy. If you have a bigger pie, you can compensate them and everybody's better off. It's a very simple arithmetic problem. In practice, we did the first part, but we didn't do the second part. And then there was this big backlash, populist backlash against globalization, against a lot of other things. I see that story being replayed right now. Technology can make the pie bigger. There's going to be winners and losers. And if we don't learn from it, we're going to make big mistakes. Earlier, someone, I forget which one of you mentioned the analogy, I think it was maybe Feifei, to social media and how we made some big mistakes in that. And a lot of people, Eric Schmitz and others have said, let's not do that again this time around. And I hope likewise we won't do the same thing with globalization. I don't have a silver bullet to speed up our ability to adapt. I mean, one thing that would help in the spirit of what Feifei's been saying all day is if we had more resources for understanding the economics of this, if we had more people thinking about how we can make these changes, because I don't think that you can just take the same solutions that worked before and just dust them off. And we don't fully understand what's happening. Like what large language models are doing to skills is different than what predictive AI did or other kinds of systems do. So we need to do the research. It's not a shortcut to doing that, and we need people to be looking at it. And then we need, I hope, and Ilya is working hard at this and others, is we need once we identify what the solutions are, we need our institutions, that Congress and administration, to be able to act faster. The fact that we saw things go awry before maybe will make people pay a little bit more attention. I said earlier that I got the sense that people on Capitol Hill and the White House are much more engaged than they are before. To the extent that translates to faster action, I guess remains to be seen. But for our part, we are put all in. My postdocs, my grad students, the other faculty here, people are so energized to work on this problem, and we're doing our best to generate the underlying research to help lay a foundation for it. But I guess we'll see if we can do better than we did last time.
Well, great. I think that is actually the perfect note to end on, because it really takes us back to kind of the importance of CPR. So much of Eric's work really underscores the importance of thinking about whether a form of technology is a complement or a substitute to labor, how much that might vary between the short run and the long run. And that's really an invitation for everyone in this community to be involved in that really critical measurement task. So thank you so much to the panel.
Thanks so much to our last panel, to the